On today's episode of The Basement Files, we discuss the case of Brad Sigmon, who was scheduled to die by firing squad on March 7, 2025 in the state of South Carolina. This will be the first firing squad execution performed by the state and only the second in the last 15 years. So we're going to talk about what got Brad here and why he decided firing squad is his preferred method of execution. Hello and welcome to a new episode of The Basement Files. I'm Ginger and I'm super excited to have you here with me today as we discuss the case of Brad Sigmon. But before we get into that, I want to give a little personal announcement. If you listen to my episode on people that fake cancer, then you know that I have been battling stage 4 breast cancer. But I've been in remission, or no evidence of disease is what we call that, for a while now, over a year. But I had a scan on the 27th, which I mentioned in that episode, and everything is clear. So I just wanted to let you all know that in case you were wondering, and I'm just really excited to share that with you. I also want to give my daughter Amy's friend Lily a shout out. I promised I would do this for Amy. And hey Lily, I appreciate you watching all of these episodes. You are awesome. With that said, let's get on with the episode. Brad Sigmon, a death row inmate in South Carolina, has decided to die by firing squad. This is the first time South Carolina will carry out a death sentence in this way. This also makes him the first to be executed by firing squad in 15 years, the last time it occurred in Utah. There have only been 3 firing squad executions in the United States since 1976, and all of those were in the state of Utah. The other execution methods in South Carolina are the electric chair and lethal injection. Death by firing squad is brand new. So 67-year-old Sigmon felt that the firing squad would be better than the electric chair, which many death row inmates in South Carolina have called old and cruel. Most also believe firing squad is horrible, but that's what Sigmon preferred out of the 3 methods. So the execution will be carried out by strapping Sigmon to a chair with a hood over his head and a target placed over his heart. This will occur in the same death chamber as the electric chair. The electric chair couldn't be moved because it's bolted to the floor, so they figured, hey, let's share a space, and created an area for firing squad executions. In that area is the chair where Sigmon will be seated. 15 feet away is a wall. The firing squad will be behind that wall, and there's a small hole in the wall where they will place their rifles and they will carry out the death sentence. But early in February, Sigmon's lawyers asked to delay the execution. They wanted to see the autopsy report of the man that was executed on January 31st of 2025. This man, Marion Bowman, was given 2 doses of pentobarbital. And they don't know if he died within a few minutes or if he died in 20 minutes. And that's kind of an important detail. Some witnesses believe that it was 20 minutes. So they were kind of justified in requesting the autopsy report because they argued that Sigmon was entitled to making the right decision by having all the facts. So he wanted to determine which execution method would be the right method for him. And he cited that he wanted to make the best decision for his family, the family of the victims, other witnesses such as the media, and the execution team, and of course himself. But as of last week, it's not so clear that the attorneys received the autopsy report because the court did delay the request. Oh, yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot going on there. And I do understand why he wanted to gather information before he made his decision. So when he is executed, which is supposed to be March the 7th, 2025, the Friday following this episode, he will be the oldest inmate executed since the death penalty was reinstated in South Carolina in 1976. And although he's exhausted all of his court appeals, there is one appeal that he has left, and of course that's to the governor. But all the arguments have failed for him. One of the arguments that his attorneys had made was that his original trial lawyers were inexperienced and they failed him by not stopping his statement to the jury, which I believe, from what I've read, was a completely hot mess. And you'll find out why here shortly, because yes, it was a hot mess. And just listen carefully when I mention a little detail about that later. They also said that his rough childhood and history of mental illness was not brought up in the trial because they feel that had the jury really gotten to hear those things, that they would not have sentenced a mentally ill man to death. So, yes, the last shot that they have is requesting that Governor McMaster reduce his sentence to life without parole. Because attorneys say that he's been a model prisoner, the guards trust him, and that he's very sorry for what he did. They say that his execution would send the message that South Carolina refuses to recognize redemption. So they are reaching for everything that they've got to try to get this execution stopped. And they're really putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that he does suffer from mental illness. So it's been 49 years since the death penalty was reinstated in South Carolina. And what Brad has working against him is the fact that no governor has granted clemency since then. Yeah. And that firing squad chamber I was talking about, they built all that stuff in 2022. The witness window is also protected by bulletproof glass, in case you were wondering. And there's even... this detail is kind of crazy. There's even a basin under the chair to catch blood. If you're watching on YouTube, you see the look on my face. And then there's the wall that the shooters stand behind. And these shooters are volunteers. And of course, witnesses, they're going to be able to see some of this, but they're only going to be able to see his profile. They're not going to be able to see the firing squad because of the wall. And the reason why the state even approved firing squad as a way to carry out the death penalty was because at the time, the drugs needed to carry out lethal injection were difficult to acquire. The suppliers, that they just refused to sell them if it meant that their names would be public. And a shield law was then passed to protect the suppliers, but the firing squad was then on the books. So it became an option. Idaho is also getting ready to resume firing squads because of the difficulty in acquiring lethal injection drugs. So while South Carolina was able to resolve that through their shield law, Idaho is still having that problem. And then you have Sigmon, who chose firing squad because the witnesses of actually 3 previous lethal injection executions said that while the inmates had stopped breathing and moving within a matter of minutes, it was later determined that it possibly took 20 minutes to die. So that's kind of scary. And I know that everyone has different opinions on the death penalty. Some people say, let him have it. He should suffer like his victims suffered. Others are completely against the death penalty. And I get it. There's valid arguments on both sides of the matter. And I'm not going to express an opinion either way because there are so many factors involved in this case. I just kind of stay Switzerland on it. But something that I found very interesting in this is that in one previously executed inmate's autopsy report, and it was Richard Moore, he was the inmate, it was said that he was given 2 large doses of pentobarbital 11 minutes apart on November 1st, 2024. 11 minutes apart. The autopsy then showed an excessive amount of fluid on Moore's lungs. An expert said that Moore might have felt like he was drowning. And I think that's what really scared Sigmon was because he didn't want to experience that. The state attorneys, however, in the Moore case, said that fluid on the lungs wasn't unusual when large doses of pentobarbital was used in executions. In 2022, 2 Oklahoma inmates requested firing squad over lethal injection because of the scary possibilities, but they were ultimately executed by lethal injection, so their requests weren't granted. 2025 is still very young, which means there are many anniversaries, birthdays, and other special occasions in which flowers will be needed. So check out 1-800-FLORALS to find that perfect gift for your friend, loved one, coworker, boss, whoever you want to buy a gift for. So click the link in this episode's description to check out 1-800-FLORALS and find the perfect gift. As for what Sigmon did to get to where he is now, he killed his ex-girlfriend's parents with a baseball bat in 2001. He broke into their Greenville County, South Carolina home where they were minding their own business and decided to take their lives away from them. The couple was William David and Gladys Lark. He was 62, she was 59. They were in separate rooms in the home, and Sigmon kept going back and forth between those 2 rooms. He would go after William David and beat him with the baseball bat. Then he would go to the room Gladys was in and he would beat her. And then he would go back to where William David was and beat him some more. And he continued this back and forth until they were both no longer alive. Sigmon then kidnapped his ex-girlfriend, and she had just broken it off with him the week before. And when he kidnapped her, he did so at gunpoint. But she managed to escape his car, and she took off running. She was running for her life, and he was running after her. And while running after her, he was shooting at her, but fortunately, he missed every single time. And when he later confessed to this crime, he used a line, a very cliche line that we've heard in other true crime cases and even in the movies. And that was, "If I couldn't have her, no one could have her." So the death of William David and Gladys resulted in his 2 death sentences. He also received a 30-year term for first-degree burglary because there's something that he stole from the home that day. And you're going to find out what that was here shortly, and that will explain why the term was 30 years instead of something lesser. But anyhow, his attorneys argued that he had a rough childhood. He was born in 1957 to a 17-year-old mother. She then had 4 more children after him. They were 1 year apart. One was a year apart from the other, so she had them very close together. And they moved a lot because Sigmon's dad was in the military and was stationed in various places, including the Philippines. So Brad got to live in the Philippines for a while. But his father was very abusive toward his mom and toward him. When he would see his father abusing his mother, he would jump right in to protect her. So he was on the receiving end of a lot of that. But it was in his heart to protect his mother. And I just can't imagine what that was doing to him. Obviously something very bad. He ended up suffering from mental illness, and he turned to drug abuse in his adolescence. So his parents divorced, and his mother, Virginia Wooten, was still pretty young, and being a single parent was very difficult for her. But she eventually remarried, and so did Ronnie Sigmon. So Brad Sigmon finds himself going back and forth between his parents' homes. But outside of the abuse and the divorce, everything else seemed relatively normal. However, he was caring for his younger siblings, and I don't know to what extent he was caring for them. If it was most of the time, then that's not necessarily normal. If it was some of the time, sure. Oldest sibling taking care of the younger siblings, that's pretty typical, especially when there are a lot of kids. He even got a job at the age of 16 to help ease the financial burden on his family. And that happens sometimes too. But how much of a financial burden he was relieving, I don't know. But just 9 weeks before he graduated high school, he was 19 years old, and he was 9 weeks from graduating. He decided to drop out and get married. He couldn't wait 9 more weeks. He just couldn't wait. He dropped everything, and he married, and then had a son. His family would say that he was a great dad, and that he cared a great deal for his family. But his ex-wife would argue that he was pretty abusive. The court records showed that he struggled a great deal with mental health issues and the drug abuse that I mentioned just a minute ago. And of course, he ended up divorced. His mental health issues and drug use problems, they persisted through adulthood and really affected his relationship with his wife, and he was just a hot mess. But it was his ex-wife, Cheryl Tomberlin, during the sentencing phase of his trial, that described him as abusive during their marriage. Sigmon was 43 years old when he murdered the Larks. He had dated their daughter, Rebecca Barber, for several years, and they lived in a trailer near the Larks' home. Barber had ended her relationship with Sigmon and moved in with her parents. That resulted in Sigmon developing this very intense obsession with Barber and stalking her. He was following her everywhere she went because he was convinced that she was seeing another man. He was trying to prove to himself that she was seeing another man, and that's the reason why she left him. In the meantime, he was constantly asking her to get back together with him, and of course she's saying, "No, I don't want to get back together with you. I am done with you. I don't want to do this anymore." And plus, she had kids in the mix too, so of course she's not going to want to be with this abusive man. The abuse had a lot to do with why she left. Well, the night before the murders, Sigmon and his friend Eugene Strube were doing cocaine and drinking alcohol all night long. So the next morning, Sigmon told Strube that when Barber took her kids to school, he was going to go over to her parents' house and quote-unquote tie her parents up. Well, he then said, quote, he was going to get a hold of Barber, and I'm assuming that was him thinking about kidnapping her. Well, Strube said he was going to help Sigmon in his plot, but then he decided it wasn't going to be a very good idea, and he backed out, which was a very smart move on his part. It wasn't very smart that he had initially agreed to help Sigmon with his plot, but a good idea that he did end up backing out. But all alone, here Sigmon went to the Larks' home. William David was in the kitchen. Gladys was in the living room. Sigmon, with his baseball bat, he initiated that attack. And of course, once the couple died, he stopped the attack. And it was found that William David, and Gladys suffered 9 blows to their heads, crushing their skulls. Sigmon had then found David's gun when he was finished beating them. And that is what led to the 30-year burglary sentence, because he had stolen David's gun. And he waited for Rebecca to come home. And when she got home, she saw that Sigmon was there and that he had the gun in his hand. And he pointed the gun toward her and made her get into his car. The plan was for them to drive to North Carolina. However, his plan was thwarted when Rebecca managed to jump out of the car and took off running. And as I said before, he chased after her while shooting at her, but he missed. He kept missing. His aim was terrible, thank goodness. This caused him to just give up and leave the scene. So, Barber, she was transported to the hospital after this very traumatizing event and treated for any injuries that she sustained in her escape. This then led to a manhunt for Sigmon because of David and Gladys's murder and Rebecca's kidnapping and attempted murder. The charges that were filed against him were murder, kidnapping, and assault with intent to kill. The burglary charge, of course, again, was stemming from the gun theft. Sigmon was on the run for a total of 11 days before he was caught in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. He was then extradited to South Carolina. Right off the bat, prosecutors knew that they were going to seek the death. I can't talk today, guys. The prosecutors knew they were going to seek the death penalty because of the double murder. The indictment was really easy. Sigmon was indicted on 2 counts of murder, first-degree burglary, kidnapping, and a battery of other charges. The trial began in July of 2002 for the murders and the burglary. He pleaded guilty, putting a quick end to that trial. The next step was the jury coming up with a sentence, so there was the sentencing phase. So Barbera's testimony in this sentencing phase of the trial was very crucial. She testified to the abuse that she suffered at the hands of Sigmon and his violent tendencies that had escalated over time and led to her leaving him. Her testimony illustrated for the jury just how serious the situation was and the emotional and psychological toll that it took on her and her family. Her courage to share this information made a huge impression on the jury, which helped them come up with this sentence that they imposed on Sigmon. The prosecution said that Sigmon deserved the death penalty because the Larks suffered the most horrific death. There were also a lot of aggravating factors in the case. Prosecutors said that Sigmon needed to be sentenced to death so he could be shown the same mercy he gave his victims. Yeah. When Sigmon's ex-wife Cheryl Tomberlin testified, she detailed times when Sigmon would hit and threaten her. So, although his family called him a good father, there were actually no details as to whether he ever hurt his child. I looked and looked and looked and couldn't find anything. The only thing I could find was where the family said he was a good father. So my hope is that he did not inflict any kind of abuse on his son. I pray that he didn't have to deal with that at the hands of his father. Well, another person that testified in the sentencing phase was Darrell Lark, the son of William David and Gladys, and Barbera's brother. He gave a very emotional testimony during the sentencing because the death of his parents just really took this emotional and psychological toll on him. He wept as he spoke about his parents and the devastating impact their murders had on their family. His heartfelt words helped the jury understand the profound loss and suffering caused by Sigmon's actions. Another one that testified was Renee Smith. She is another child of the Larks. She echoed her brother's testimony about how the death of their parents devastated them and had caused a lot of emotional and psychological turmoil. Virginia Wooten, Sigmon's mom, she broke down on the stand. She expressed her deep sorrow and regret over her son's actions. I mean, I couldn't imagine having to, being the parent and feeling like I created this person that did such terrible things. I can't imagine what that was like for her. And I'm glad I can't imagine that because you've got the family that lost their loved ones. And that's hard when you lose a loved one to something so violent. There are no words for it at all. And then you have the mother of the person that took the lives of other people. And these people that do these crimes, that commit these crimes, don't even think about how it can hurt their own families. It doesn't matter. But anyway, the defense said that Sigmon simply acted out due to his relationship, and that the mitigating factors such as mental health issues, drug abuse, and being a model prisoner didn't warrant the death penalty. They sought a life sentence instead. The jury, however, agreed that Sigmon needed to be sentenced to death. Even pleading guilty did not spare him from this fate. Sigmon did apologize to the Larks during the sentencing phase of this trial. But that came after his rant to the jury. And here's where I mentioned earlier about him ranting to the jury and something that he did during that. He had opened up a suitcase containing all of these photos and stuff of Barber. There is a photo online of him standing there in his suit with a suitcase in front of him, and he's got all of these photos and stuff in front of him. And that did not help him at all. It was some big giant rant. I don't know exactly what was said. I tried to see if I could find any kind of video, and I couldn't. But anyway, an appeal was filed in 2005, but the South Carolina Supreme Court turned it down. May 2013, another appeal was filed. It was also shot down by the South Carolina Supreme Court. A federal appeal was then filed in 2018, and it was rejected by the U.S. District Court for the District of South Carolina. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals shot down the fourth appeal in April of 2020. The final appeal was in 2021, and the U.S. Supreme Court dismissed it. So now the only appeal that he has left is to the governor of South Carolina to issue a stay. Nonetheless, the South Carolina Supreme Court, they did issue a stay in 2021. He was originally scheduled to be executed February 2nd, 2021, or February 12th, February 12th, 2021. The stay was issued because the state didn't have the drugs to complete the lethal injection. At the time, that was the state's only form of execution that they were using. The issue with the acquisition of lethal injection drugs, mostly due to the pharmaceutical companies not wanting to supply them for death sentences, the state had reinstated their electric chair and introduced the firing squad executions as alternatives. Sigmon was then rescheduled to be executed by electric chair on June the 18th, 2021. Suddenly, Sigmon's death warrant was suspended because the South Carolina Supreme Court ruled that Sigmon and another inmate should be given the choice to be executed by electric chair or firing squad. Firing squad hadn't yet been finalized as an execution method, though. Sigmon and the other inmate then filed a lawsuit with the state against the revival of the electric chair. They didn't think that was a good idea. The lethal injection drugs issue resolved in September 2023 when the state was able to finally acquire the drugs. However, electric chair and firing squad remained execution methods, giving inmates choices. Several inmates in South Carolina were involved in that lawsuit. They argued that both firing squad and electric chair were unconstitutional because of the pain and suffering the methods could cause. They called it cruel and unusual punishment. The court ruled that both the electric chair and firing squad agreed with existing legal procedures for the death penalty. There was no law stating that executions had to be instant or painless. The lethal injection drugs issue resolved, again in September 2023, when the state was able to acquire those drugs. The lawsuit that was filed by the inmates was dismissed in July 2024. The constitutionality of the electric chair and firing squad was upheld. This paved the way to the resumption of executions. At the time, 32 inmates were sitting on death row. 5 of those, including Sigmon, had exhausted all appeals. And now the 13-year moratorium on executions had ended in South Carolina. That occurred in September 2024. 3 of the 5 inmates have already been executed. Sigmon is next. His death warrant was signed February 7th, 2025 for his March 7th, 2025 execution. He had until February 21st to select his execution method. If he declined to choose, the electric chair was going to be the default method. Instead, a week after the death warrant was issued, Sigmon filed the appeal for stay of execution, asking the court to delay the death warrant because his lawyers hadn't received the autopsy report of Marion Bowman Jr. That was the inmate that was executed by lethal injection on January 31st, 2025. Sigmon and his attorneys wanted to evaluate that method before choosing which one he was going to decide upon. Attorney said Sigmon didn't want the electric chair. He wanted to choose between lethal injection and firing squad, but he had reservations about lethal injection because of observations that the previous 3 inmates had suffered for 20 minutes after injection. On February 21st, 2025, Sigmon appealed to the South Carolina Supreme Court to hear the evidence of brain damage that he had sustained from childhood trauma, as well as his mental illness. He said that those factors made him ineligible for capital punishment. That's the same day he made the decision to die by firing squad if his appeals failed. Sigmon chose this method because he was afraid the electric chair would, quote-unquote, burn and cook him alive. He was also afraid that lethal injection would cause him to suffer for 20 minutes like what was suspected of the last 3 inmates that were executed. He's aware that firing squad is a violent death.
Tonight we are getting some more information from the South Carolina death row inmate. His name is Brad Sigmon. He is now asking for his execution to be delayed. As of right now, though, he is scheduled to go ahead and be executed by firing squad next Friday in March. Sigmon is on death row for the beating death of his ex-girlfriend's parents with a baseball bat back in 2001. And now he's asking prison leaders to release more information about the state's lethal injection drug and procedures. This all comes after autopsies from the last 2 death row inmates revealed they both needed twice the dose of the drug. Sigmon's lawyers say he was forced to go ahead and choose death by firing squad because he's scared of a prolonged death if he goes with lethal injection. His lawyers say that they want the state to go ahead and release more details about how the drug is stored, its expiration date, and how its potency and purity is tested. If carried out, Sigmon will become the first inmate in 15 years to die by the firing squad here in the United States.
When the execution takes place and Sigmon is strapped into the chair with the hood over his head, the 3 shooters armed with rifles containing live ammunition will open fire after the warden reads the execution order. The 3-member firing squad will consist of volunteers. Those present will mainly be family members of Sigmon, family members of the victims, reporters, attorneys, and prison staff. Everyone will only be able to see the right side profile of Sigmon from behind the bulletproof glass. After the shots, a doctor will examine Sigmon. After he is declared dead, a curtain will be drawn over the bulletproof window and the witnesses will be escorted out. Sigmon's lawyer has called this barbaric and a state-sanctioned atrocity. There are some ongoing protests against Brad Sigmon's execution. The fact he chose firing squad is shocking to a lot of people, although he has stated his reasoning for choosing that method. While there has always been a lot of controversy surrounding the ethics and humanity of the death penalty, the objection is especially strong in South Carolina right now. Well, that does it for this episode of The Basement Files. Be sure to subscribe so that you are notified of any extra episodes or bonus content that I post. I will be adding some bonus content for this particular case so that you know what happened to Brad Sigmon. Will the execution go through or will it not? We will have to wait and see on March the 7th. So be sure to share this, tell your friends about it. I am so happy to be able to tell these stories to you guys. And until next time, be good and God bless.